All right, let's get straight into it. We are looking at one of the most consequential geopolitical events of the 21st century. This is a crisis that snowballed from a localized regional conflict into an absolute worldwide economic meltdown in literally the blink of an eye. So, if you've been watching the news lately and wondering how on earth an event in the Middle East has managed to completely rewrite the rules of global trade, upend energy markets, and even skyrocket your grocery bill, well, you are in the exact right place. We're going to break it all down. Here is exactly how we'll tackle this today. 1. The 2026 Iran War. 2. Closing the Hormuz choke point. 3. The global energy shock. 4. The threat to food security. And finally, 5. Markets and economic fallout. Let's jump in. You know, the sheer speed of this escalation is just staggering. We are talking less than 2 weeks for a regional military conflict to become a full-blown global emergency. We went from initial airstrikes on February 28th to the effective closure of the world's most critical maritime route just days later, which ultimately culminated in a massive 39% spike in global oil prices. It was a stunning, unprecedented collapse of a highly fragile system. Section 1. The 2026 Iran War. Okay, so the conflict officially kicked off on February 28th. Joint U.S.-Israeli strikes, codenamed Operation Epic Fury, targeted Iranian leadership and infrastructure. And as you'd expect, Iran immediately retaliated, launching waves of drone and missile strikes right across the Gulf. This rapid-fire exchange triggered widespread airspace closures, literally paralyzing regional air travel overnight. And, critically, it involved the immediate targeting of highly vulnerable energy infrastructure. Section 2. Closing the Hormuz choke point. Picture the Strait of Hormuz. It's this incredibly narrow geographic bottleneck squeezed between Iran and Oman, connecting the Persian Gulf to the rest of the world. You really have to think of this not just as another shipping lane, but as the literal jugular vein of our global energy supply. When a passage like this gets blocked, the global economy basically suffers a heart attack. To really wrap your head around the sheer vulnerability we're dealing with here, just consider the volume. Roughly 20% of the entire world's petroleum liquids and 20% of all global liquefied natural gas absolutely must pass through this one single narrow channel. And unlike certain pipelines or alternative land routes you might hear about, there is no quick, immediate workaround for a maritime volume of this scale, period. So, by early March, a naval blockade had effectively shut the strait down completely. Commercial traffic, it plummeted to near zero, down from its usual average of about 60 massive ships a day. Suddenly, you've got over 150 commercial vessels just left stranded in the water. And for the very few brave enough to even consider attempting the journey, war risk insurance premiums exploded. We're talking over 16 times normal rates. It entirely priced commercial shipping out of the water. Section 3, the global energy shock. 20 million. That is the staggering, almost unbelievable number of barrels of oil per day that were abruptly, violently halted from reaching the global market. To put that into a bit of perspective for you, there is zero excess capacity anywhere on planet Earth that can just quickly switch on to fill a 20 million barrel a day gap. It doesn't exist. And, well, this was the immediate result of that gap. Brent crude prices surged past $120 a barrel in a matter of days. And look, this wasn't just abstract numbers flashing red on some trader's screen. This meant immediate, visceral pain at the pump for everyday consumers. It drove U.S. gasoline prices soaring back over $4 a gallon and instantly sparked a massive wave of inflation across pretty much all global transportation and logistics networks. The International Energy Agency definitely didn't mince words when evaluating the fallout here. They officially categorized this exact event as, quote, the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Let that sink in. The greatest global energy security challenge in history. We are absolutely flying blind in uncharted territory here. But what makes this truly unprecedented is the dual nature of the shock. It wasn't just oil taking a hit. Liquefied natural gas supplies were being strangled at the exact same time. On the oil side, major producers saw their output trapped, which dropped global supply by up to 10 million barrels a day. Concurrently, Qatar Energy was literally forced to declare force majeure, completely halting vital gas exports simply because their ships physically could not leave the Gulf. Now, here is where the whole story takes a really dark turn that caught a lot of folks completely off guard. You might be asking yourself, how exactly does a fuel crisis way over in the Middle East threaten the food sitting on your dinner plate? Why on earth does an energy blockade lead to very real warnings of global starvation? Which brings us to Section 4, the threat to food security. See, the Gulf region doesn't just export fuel. It actually controls roughly 45% of the world's exported sulfur and half of all global urea exports. If you don't know, those are the absolute vital foundational building blocks for commercial fertilizers. Plus, LNG itself is a primary feedstock needed to make nitrogen fertilizers. And the timing of this war, it couldn't have been worse. It perfectly coincided with the Northern Hemisphere's crucial spring planting season. Without fertilizer, global crop yields just flat out collapse. Because of this exact domino effect, the UN World Food Program had to issue a dire warning. 45 million additional people could be pushed into acute hunger. And sadly, this isn't some theoretical worst-case scenario risk. It is the direct mathematical result of cascading fertilizer shortages and skyrocketing agricultural costs. And in a really cruel twist of irony, this crisis is hitting the oil-rich Gulf states themselves incredibly hard on a humanitarian level. These nations actually rely on the Strait of Hormuz to import over 80% of their own food. With the blockade in place, they faced a sudden, massive grocery supply emergency. Retailers had to resort to literally airlifting in basic food staples, which caused local consumer grocery prices to violently spike anywhere from 40 to 120% in just a matter of weeks. Crazy, right? Finally, let's look at Section 5, markets and economic fallout. The localized financial devastation is immense. The United Nations Development Program estimates that Arab nations stand to lose anywhere between $120 billion and $194 billion in GDP. What we're witnessing is a systemic collapse of their entire regional economic model, driven 100% by the inability to export energy or import goods. And globally, the picture is incredibly grim. We are seeing direct, undeniable echoes of 1970s-style stagflation. Stagnant growth combined with painfully high inflation. Just as central banks in the US and Europe were finally hoping to cut interest rates, this sudden, massive supply shock forced them to slam the brakes and postpone those cuts. This immediately triggered steep declines across global stock markets and massive sell-offs in bond markets, terrifying investors worldwide. This kind of economic pain, it respects absolutely no borders. But it does hit in distinct waves. It crashed first onto highly dependent Asian economies, think Japan and South Korea, who rely almost entirely on the Gulf for their energy needs. But it doesn't stop there. The next wave of demand destruction threatens Africa, before finally rippling deeply into the core of European industrial sectors. I want to leave you with this incredibly sobering thought from Nobel-winning economist Simon Johnson regarding those 20 million blocked barrels. He said, "There is no excess capacity anywhere in the world that can fill that gap. We have built this highly connected, ultra-optimized global machine where a single 20-mile stretch of water dictates the price of your daily commute, the cost of your groceries, and essentially global stability itself." So the truly terrifying question isn't just when the strait will reopen, but whether our interconnected global economy can actually survive until it does. Thanks for joining me on this explainer today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next one.